This is Dre's Ditches. Just a single linear earthwork, one long mound that runs along the side of the footpath. Dre's Ditches here, just to the left. They're thought to be an Iron Age boundary marker, because we're right on the Icknield Way here, the ancient Icknield Way. I'm just walking along the edge of the golf course at the very northeastern corner of Luton, or as I prefer to call it, just south of Streatley. That over there is Warden Hill, and we've come to Warden Hill today because it's nearly Halloween, and Warden Hill is a place of death and destruction and execution and torture, dismemberment, massacre. Quite an appropriate place to go, I think. Just headed up to Galley Hill. I'm sorry, did I just refer to that as Warden Hill in the last shot? I might have done. It's not Warden Hill, it's Galley Hill. In case that's what I said. I don't know, not sure. Anyway, we're kind of walking in the opposite direction to Luton at the moment, so we get nice views of the countryside to the north and the northeast. Mushrooms at last. I can't name them off the top of my head. Part of my brain's saying tawny grisette, but I might be wrong. I'll look these up when I get home and stick it on the screen. Can you see that army of pylons marching across the horizon? That's Sundon Pit. Something with some seriously strong digging action has made its home down there. That's dug into solid chalk, as you can see from the spoil heap. Something with a... oh look, you can still see the claw marks as well. You can see the claw marks in the stone where it's been mined out. And there, look. Something quite large. There's a bit of space between those claws. Badger, probably. That's got some strong front legs. I'm sure quite a few of you know that when you come across a hill known as Galley Hill, 99% of the time that's just a more society friendly, not to upset anybody version of Gallows Hill, because there used to be gallows up here. I don't know on exactly what spot. I don't think there's actually anything to mark it, but there are also burial mounds up here, at least 4 visible ones, similar to Dunstable Downs, from Neolithic through to Iron Age. I'm going to see if I can find any of those. I'm descending the far side of the hill already. It's not the hugest hill, but it's just a very prominent spot. Along there is the old Icknield Way, so you can see it runs right by the bottom of this hill. But coming up this side of the hill, on our right, we've got a couple of burial mounds. They're hidden away in these little thickets. Where the trees are, basically, is where the burial mounds are. And somewhere up here was that gallows. Now, they didn't just hang criminals. They also hung witches. The archaeologists do know exactly where those gallows were, because during an excavation under the gallows they found a horse's skull. It was a horse's skull had been buried with a set of dice sitting on top of it. It sounds like black magic to me. I know that my two youngest nieces of my brothers, Annie and Molly. Oh, hold on. Oh dear. Oh, that's better. Right, I know you two don't really like scary stories. You don't like ghosts and monsters. So I thought, I do want to do a little Halloweeny kind of video, and I want to come to a spooky place, but I thought rather than scare you both with made up stories of ghosts and goblins, I thought I'd subject you to the brutality and the harsh realities of human nature instead. I've located the two northerlymost mounds. There's one just behind me in those trees there, and I'm just about to skirt around the bottom of another here. Now, I'm sat in a deep depression in the ground between the two, and I'm beginning to wonder if this might be the site of the 4th century slaughter pit that was found. What they found, quite possibly exactly where I'm sitting, back in the 1960s, was they found a 4th century slaughter pit with 8 bodies in it. Now these bodies, they consisted of an elderly couple. The lady of the couple was crippled, she only had one leg, and they were found entwined together in a little heap in this pit. They also found a family of 3, believed to be 2 parents and a 12-year-old boy, smashed and hacked and chopped to pieces. A very, very nasty, grisly death. And the remaining 3, they found two men and a woman, all in their 20s. Again, heavily mutilated. And the female, she'd been not only beheaded, her head had been chopped off along with her left arm at the shoulder. And from the forensic examination of her bones, it does look very much as though she was cut almost completely in 2, straight through the neck, straight through the arm, with a single blow of a sword, possibly an axe. Now, I read in a book by a guy called Paul Adams. I've got a couple of his books. He's a local author, and he does seem to write mostly about the mysterious and the macabre and the paranormal. He's a good local author. I like his books. He mentions in his, I think it was called Secret Luton, his Secret Luton book, that this burial pit, he mentions that by the dating that's given from the remains that were dug out, he reckons it might well have been a part of the, now how did he describe it? He called it the Great Rebellion. The Great Rebellion of AD 367. I think what he's actually referring to there is what's sometimes known as the barbarian conspiracy. It's getting right towards the end of the Roman occupation of Britain. Due to events going on elsewhere in the world around the Roman Empire, the troops and their resources here were getting severely depleted. Now, whether it was a conspiracy, I'm not sure. It's quite possible that the various barbarians knew full well what was going on with the Roman Empire, and they just all saw at about the same time their chance to reclaim some of their land. Not even reclaim it in some cases, just come and take it from elsewhere. Because you had the Scots, the Picts, the Saxons, the Gauls, they all just came streaming in, plundered their way across the country. Now, particularly the Scots and the Picts, they bashed their way through Hadrian's Wall no problem, because there were no Romans left guarding it. The handful that were left, I think they probably ran rather than tried to put up a fight. So they came down over Hadrian's Wall and just swept a trail of destruction all the way down to London. And this would have been directly on that route. So it's thought that these 8 bodies found in the pit here, possibly right here, were victims of that great barbarian conspiracy. Pheasant. It's funny, isn't it, how when something happened in the 4th century, all this time later we can turn it into Halloween stories and entertainment. If that slaughter of 8 people had happened here 50 years ago, even 100 years ago, this would be a very different video. We're just skirting around what appears to be the largest of the burial mounds. This one here. They're not as obvious as the ones at the top of the downs because of all the undergrowth. But here it is. Now there were stories, not just stories, sorry, there were accounts, reports during the 18th century of a large amount of gold and silver being found under a knoll somewhere around here, and it is generally thought amongst the local historians and archaeologists that it's this mound that it came from. You can't see today with all this on it, but apparently there is a big robber trench in the side of this one somewhere. So that's 2 off the list. So far we've got the 8 victims of a barbarian slaughter, 8 Romano-British locals put to death in a brutal fashion. And we've got 2 of the 4 burial mounds containing presumably chieftains, shamans, something along those lines. Now if we progress up to the top, I don't know for sure, but I'm going to guess that's going to be roughly where the gallows were. Gallows need to be seen, you see. And I'm imagining they'd want them to be seen from the Icknield Way down there. And they'd also want them to be seen, well, let's not forget Streatley over there. Also from the town, well, the settlement that became Luton, down there. If I can find a spot that looks likely, I'll tell you about the legend of the flaming gibbet. I'm going to say maybe just about here. There's the Icknield Way and the surrounding farmland, and then trees out of the way. If these trees weren't here, you'd see all the villages off in that direction. And then there's Luton down there. Off in the distance you can even see the hills that back on to Dunstable Downs. So I'm prepared to take a gamble that this is maybe where the gallows were, where the gibbet stood. Now most people think of witches being put to death by fire, but for some reason up here they were hanging them. They were torturing them up here publicly and hanging them. And there's an account somewhere that says there was a local rule, a very strict local rule, that when somebody had been put to death up here, they had to be soaked in tar for 3 days, just in order to ensure that their bodies didn't decompose too quickly, and they could hang up here as a message to would-be criminals and witches for as long as possible. I bet they looked disgusting. That must have been horrible. Can you imagine if you lived down there somewhere in the valley and every time you look up here on the hill, you've got these bedraggled, rotting corpses with rooks pecking at their eyes. Nasty. Now this is also reported to be Shuck country. You know Shuck, the demonic legendary black dog, elsewhere known as Barguest or Striker. Around here he's Shuck. Now he's got a little association with this place because back in the 16th century there was a wild stormy night and a massive great big thunderstorm, and a bolt of lightning hit the gallows, splintered it into lots of little pieces, and it all burnt, it all caught fire and burnt. It was burning away in the night, on this stormy night, and the people who lived down there, they were all looking up at the top of the hill, looking at this burning gibbet, and they saw Shuck dancing in the flames and screeching and howling, bellowing fire and smoke out of his own mouth. I don't think the people were really surprised to see that though, because it was long known that Shuck was responsible for collecting the souls of the executed prisoners, the executed criminals, and dragging them off to Hades. Now on the western side of the largest barrow, which is going to be somewhere roughly in that area, quite a few shallow graves were discovered. Not proper burial mounds, nothing fancy, quite the opposite. Something very hurried, showing very little respect or reverence for the bodies that were dumped into them. These were shallow graves. Some of the bodies showed signs of exposure. Bodies, I say, you know, I mean skeletons. Some of the bones showed signs of exposure, as though they weren't really even properly buried in the first place. Now these bones were also in a really terrible state. They were falling apart and they were brittle. And now we're in a right old mess. We're looking somewhere around here. Now analysis showed that they'd been buried with quicklime in order to break them down quickly. So it's thought that they were some of the victims of the gallows. They would have been witches or criminals, people who were not deemed worthy of a proper burial. Right, we're going to head south now towards Warden Hill, which is the neighbouring hill just over there. And I think, is it? Yeah, that's the triangulation point. The birds aren't going to go hungry up here. Look, we've got dog rows all over the place. Loads of wild rows with their hips. And then there's also, where are we? There's one. There's also a ton of hawthorn. Again, absolutely dripping with berries. We got some happy birds this winter. All this flint and chalk as far as you can see. There are places around here where you can go and have a little scramble around and still find little flint hand axes and arrowheads and things. I don't know exactly where, but I'm quite keen to find out. I'd half planned on going to Royston Caves today. Sorry, Royston Cave. That's a really fascinating place. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I am going to, obviously one day I am going to do a video there. But when I started looking into it, I remembered an old, another old legend, local legend that involves Royston Caves. And it also involves another chalk cave hidden away under one of the shops in the centre of Dunstable. And it involves Dunstable Downs, and it involves Tottenham, and it involves the Knights Templar, and it involves the legend of the Omphalos. it's been quite a few years since I read up on that. You're probably getting towards 20 years ago when I was reading up on that, and I've forgotten a lot of it. So I thought, well, we'll leave that one for now. I'll give that a bit more time, because I don't just want to go and visit Royston Caves and show you the weirdness. I wanted to be able to expand on it and tell you all about the legend of the Omphalos. I've got the tripod out so I can use the mega zoom. I don't usually use the mega zoom because it's all too shaky. But that over there, for any locals who know the area, that's the radio tower at the top of Caddington Hill, next to Zucchi's farm. Oh, the tiniest little movement. Right. Although Warden Hill is actually a bit higher than Galley Hill, not by that much. I think it's 40 feet, 50 feet higher. But I think the reason that the gallows and the burial mounds went onto Galley Hill instead of Warden Hill here is that Galley Hill kind of obstructs Warden Hill from the Icknield Way. If they put the burial mounds and the gallows up here, so you're looking back to the Icknield Way, off behind that, Galley Hill's sitting right in the way. We're looking down at the very beginnings of the Lee Valley there. You can see that cluster of horrible multicoloured tower blocks. That's Warland's Bank, that's the source of the River Lee. There's an enormous ancient henge there, which we will go to one day. I think I've probably mentioned this at least twice before. It's so horrendous seeing what's happened to that site with the 5 springs and the big old henge. It's not really urging me to get there in any hurry, but you can clearly see the run of the Lee Valley headed off down there. And one day I will do a Lee Valley, sorry, a River Lee video. But I think what I'll probably do, as much as I'd love to spend lots of time at Warland's Bank, I'll just very briefly pop in there and say, look, there's the spring, this is where it starts. And then we can head off south, down towards Harpenden and Batford. There's some really lovely stretches of the River Lee down there. Basically, once you get past the sewage works, there's a big sewage works just before Batford. That processes every hideous turd that comes floating out of Luton. So we'll get that out of the way, and beyond there, there's some lovely places to walk. It's beginning to look as if our triangulation point might actually be inaccessible. Unless there's a little gate somewhere along here on my left. Oh good, yeah, we can. But first, I just want to have a quick look at this little feature. I've got an idea as to what this might be. The Home Guard. We're using this as there's the golf course down there. The Home Guard, we're using this as a practice ground, a rifle range, where they were trying out all sorts of different techniques to keep the fuzzy wuzzies off of our shores. Now look at this funny little feature here. There's a semicircular sort of horseshoe shaped dugout, and a little plateau and a steep bank. I did read somewhere that the Home Guard were responsible for damaging a couple of burial mounds with their little practice runs and their exercises that they were doing up here. This feature you can actually see on Google Maps very clearly. And when I first saw it, I thought, what's that funny horseshoe shaped thing? Is that a prehistoric enclosure? But I realised looking at it, it wasn't really big enough to be much use as anything like that. So I think there's a fair chance that there is what the Home Guard done. Right, I'm going to pop up to the triangulation point, and I'm going to get out the tripod and the super zoom and see if I can see any of the other triangulation points from here. Right, we're at the triangulation point, and it's very definitely the highest point on Warden Hill. Right, let's get that super zoom out and see what I can see. Forget the super zoom, it's too much messing about. At the end of the day, we've got one over there at Sharp and O'Clappers. We've got one off in the distance at Tottenham. We've got one on Dunstable Downs, one on Ivanhoe Beacon. You can kind of see the points where they are, but you can't see the actual triangulation points. There's one more spooky story. Back to the radio tower there at Caddington. Those woods around the radio tower. There was a report there back in the... Now I might be getting this wrong. I think it was in the 1960s. There's a very strange report of a... depends how you interpret it, really. A form, a creature of some kind. There were some people up there in the woods at night for some reason, don't know why, and they came across a strange area of mist and lights, and as they walked into it, what to me sounds like some sort of demonic creature out of a film or something. You know, they said it was a huge 10-foot tall creature with wings that rose up out of the lights and the mist before flying off, shooting up into the sky. And when you read their account of it, it actually sounds a little bit like that American Mothman, that Mothman legend. But this is the UK, and this was in the 1960s. That whole Mothman thing, I think that's a different kettle of fish. There's no telling what that might have been. Sounds very odd. It's not something that you can immediately think of you know, maybe a rational explanation for. All the mist and the lights and the 10-foot tall and the wings, that's very odd. Now also, up there in the woods on Caddington Hill, that's another site where repeatedly, over the decades, evidence of black magic or satanic rites, all that kind of thing, has been found. You know, chopped up animals, cows' heads and dismembered chickens, and you know, the remains of fires and strange markings cut into the trees. It seems to have all started about the same time as the satanic goings on at Clop Hill Church, St Mary's Church at Clop Hill. I did a video on that before. That went on for a few decades. Very nasty business, people digging up graves and all sorts. Now the reports of spooky findings up in the woods at Caddington seem to have started at about the same time as that. I think because of the films of the time and the media of the time, it was a bit of a national fad. But apparently even quite recently, there's still spooky goings on in those there woods. More here, look. Looks like a big crater with 2 or 3 mounds around the outside of it. Not marked on the map, so don't know if that's the home guard or whether it's burial mounds. No idea. You find these bits and pieces of chalk pit, could be an old chalk pit. You find these bits and pieces all over the place, and some are marked, some aren't. You know, some are known, some aren't, some are excavated, some aren't. It's always interesting to wander around them and let your imagination do the rest. Right, well that's about as close as I ever like to get to Luton, unless I'm visiting the army surplus shop. But what a little hill of horrors that was, eh? Back there behind me. I'd heard all about the place. I'd read about it plenty of times, but I'd never been there. But there you go. The Hill of Horrors. And I hope that didn't scare you too much, Molly and Annie. If it did, don't worry, you don't ever have to come here. It's nowhere near your house. That's Maidenbower. That's where the ghosts live. Slippy wet chalk. Oh, very slippy. Look. Good job I got my stick. Well, all done then. That's the end of today's little foray. I'm nearly back at the car now. I parked just next to the golf course. So I'll see you somewhere next weekend. Not sure where yet. Hope you all have a good week. See you later.